All right. I'm wearing my Ubuntu glasses so I can properly install those extensions better. No, but yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we can talk about anything you like. Nothing's off limits.
Okay. Hello and welcome back to another special podcast right here on the Total OS Today Technology channel. Total technology for beginners and beyond. If you don't know who I am a Windows user that promotes Linux. You may stop laughing now, but it's for a reason. And speaking of Linux, my first love, my first date with Linux was with something called Ubuntu back in 2006-ish. And we have a special team member from Ubuntu, all the way from the UK, from the Ubuntu Kingdom. His name is Alan Pope. And Alan, hello.
Hello, how you doing? Good to be here.
Great to have you on the show. All right, so Alan, exactly what do you do at Canonical that makes Ubuntu?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've had a number of roles at Canonical. I've worked at Canonical for about 6 years, and currently I'm a Snap advocate or developer advocate. The general role is developer advocate. So I spend all day talking to developers about what their needs are for packaging software for Linux. So we're trying to bring more software to Linux, and that's not just the desktop, for server, cloud, IoT, everything. It's just bringing more software to the Linux platform and making it easier for developers to do that. And that's what I do all day, every day.
Snap developer. Okay.
Yeah, so Snap developer advocate. So we're trying to convince people to port their stuff to Linux and make it available as snaps.
You're like an advisor. You're like the concierge in The Godfather. Don't disrespect the Ubuntu family, okay? No, just
I've managed to get to the age of 46 and still not seen any of the Godfather films. I feel
terrible. My goodness, you have to see them. You got the classic stuff.
I feel terrible. Whenever it comes up, I forget.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about briefly Ubuntu, the history. Did Ubuntu get started back in 04 and 05, something like that?
So I wasn't around when it first started. I heard about Ubuntu through a friend of mine. I was running Debian at the time when it first started. Yeah, in 2004. The way I understand it, and the story has, depending upon your perspective, who tells the story, it's different. But as I understand it, Mark Shuttleworth, who sold a company he'd been building in South Africa, Thwart. He sold it for a large sum of money. So he had some time on his hands and some money in his pocket and decided to do some interesting things. He went into space with the Russians as a space tourist. And then when he came back, I think he wanted to make a consumer polished desktop Linux operating system. And that's where the idea was born. I have this vague recollection that apparently he came up with the idea while he was on a ship on the way to Antarctica for some reason. I don't know why. That may be a myth, but apparently he came up with the idea. He pulled a bunch of people together, a lot of people from the Debian project and some people from outside that he already knew from other projects, pulled them together, and they built the first version of Ubuntu, which was the Warty Warthog, which was in 2004, October 2004, and I started using it soon after that. But yeah, that's
okay.
The rough embryo of where it came from.
Interesting. I started in 06, so was that Hardy Heron?
Mm-hmm.
So I heard about Ubuntu, I think it was Popular Science, Popular Mechanics. Are you tired of Windows XP? Try Ubuntu. And I thought, what the heck is Ubuntu? And that's how it got started with me. But back then, Ubuntu and probably a lot of Linux desktop probably were not ready for prime time for the Windows user, as it were. So
there are a lot of different types of Windows users. I don't think there really is a Windows user. I think it's very different. You ask 10 different people what they do with their computer, and it's very different.
Well, the mom and pop family, the average person who maybe never even heard of Linux back then or now. That's what I was saying. It wasn't quite ready for the masses yet, but I stuck with it. And back then I remember, because of course it was Windows XP, that thing was fast. Ubuntu was faster than Windows. But I had trouble with this and that, codecs and this and that. So I was distro hopping. I was a madman, trying different versions. So back in I finally got settled in I think it was probably 08, 09 with Linux Mint, a little bit more user-friendly out of the box. From there, I went to Zorn, which kind of reminded me, looks like Windows, so it made me feel a little bit more comfortable. And that's when I saw Linux get progressively better. A few Linux distros, not all of them. Of course, I can't really recommend Arch or Gentoo, to a beginner. Nothing wrong with that.
Well,
once you learn Linux, then some people do.
Some people recommend Arch and Gentoo to the new user, but I think it's very difficult because they have the perspective of someone with a lot of experience, and recommending something.
Yes. Well, I like to keep my friends, Alan, so thank you. No. So, all right. So I stuck with it, and then back in 2010. 09, 10, I was looking on YouTube for more stuff on Linux. I was hungry for Linux. After testing so many, I had a stack of discs, CDs, DVDs. It was ridiculous. So I thought, you know what? I'm looking on YouTube, and these tutorials, these videos aren't very good. They're just not being helpful. If a person used only Windows and says only Windows is the best, duh. Or if a person used only Mac or only Linux, I wasn't getting that neutral view. Just tell me what you see no matter what you use. So I thought, don't complain, Toss, just do it. So I started the channel back in 2010. Just wanted to learn Linux, and here we are today. But I've often said that if it wasn't for Ubuntu, I wouldn't be here. So to the team at Canonical, thank you. So
we do get a lot of people for whom Ubuntu is their first foray into Linux. Like I predate Ubuntu, so for me, I think I used Coral and then Red Hat and then Debian and then eventually Ubuntu, and I've stuck with Ubuntu ever since late 2004, 2005.
Okay.
But we get a lot of people who tell us, I started with Ubuntu, and then after that I moved on to whatever it might be. It could be Linux Mint for whatever reason. It could be Arch because they like fiddling with all the nuts and bolts and they like being on the bleeding edge, or it could be some distro that has a desktop that we don't have well maintained in the Ubuntu archive, and they wanted a completely different desktop experience. It could be that. So there's a ton of reasons why people move off of Ubuntu, and that's great. It's lovely to know that people used Ubuntu as their first step on that journey. Obviously it would be great if everyone continued to use Ubuntu, but you can't, you can't expect everyone to want what you want and have the same expectations you have. So people move on, and that's fine.
I started to feel comfortable with Ubuntu GNOME 2 back then. I thought it was very easy, Then in 2011, they switched to Unity. And that was the same time GNOME 3 came out, about the same time, I think. Boy, I remember the backlash of the community, Alan, for both desktops. And I have to be honest, back then as a Windows user, I'm going, oh, this is funny, But I thought to myself, well, I want to pick one to recommend to the masses, as it were, either GNOME or Unity. And I made a decision, Unity just seems not quite as shocking as GNOME 3. And I think what put me over the edge, over the hump to decide Unity was Linus Torvalds, probably the father of modern Linux from what I hear. He called GNOME 3 an unholy mess. Now, I defended it. It wasn't unholy. But it did seem like it took more getting used to, especially if you used XFCE or GNOME 2 or whatever. So I stuck with Unity, and I felt very comfortable with Unity.
Right, but there is a problem in our inverted commas community. I use the word advisedly because people see themselves as, my opinion that I feel about this thing. I am representing. I have lots of people behind me that I'm representing. Turns out that's often not the case. Turns out that one very vocal person who doesn't like a thing is not actually representing the views of a lot of people, but a lot of people are perfectly happy with that changed thing, and they're just quiet. Like, I'll give you an example. I gave a talk a little while ago, and there were hundreds of people in the room, and one of the questions I asked was, do you use Linux? What Linux distro do you use? Have you heard of Ubuntu? Have you heard of Linux Mint and all these others? And I got people to just put their hands up to say what they had. This is a predominantly technical audience, right? And after I'd gone through all of that and gone through all the talks, and afterwards, multiple people came up to me and said, look, I use Ubuntu, but I didn't want to put my hand up because I didn't want you to ask me any tricky questions in front of the audience. I felt, I was a bit shy and a bit introvert, and I don't really want to be put on the spot and ask questions.
Okay.
And a lot of people feel like that. They feel like they don't want to have to justify the choice that they've made. They've made that choice. Wow. They're happy with it. Why should they have to argue positively for the choice that they've made? So often you'll find the negativity drowns out the small number of people who are positive. When we chose to switch to Unity, yes, there were a lot of people who didn't like it, but actually there are still a ton of people now who use Unity. Probably, I can't give you a concrete number for this, there are probably more people using Unity than any other desktop, right?
No,
Given that you can buy a machine from Dell that runs Unity out of the box, and they sell a lot of machines, there's a large number of them. So I think we have to be careful when we're listening to, I think what Jono once called the peanut gallery of people online who believe that their opinion is the same as everybody else's opinion, because it just isn't.
Well, once again, Unity to me back then as a Windows user just wasn't that shocking,
Right.
It just, as opposed to GNOME. GNOME was just, I'm like, whoa, it looks cool, but man, it takes a lot more to learn. Yeah.
One of the big changes that Unity and GNOME and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
One of the big changes was removing the whole go and find a thing you want to run in a menu. Like previously, every desktop, basically, you'd click a button somewhere on your screen, and then you'd hunt and peck somewhere until you found the thing you want to run, whatever application, whether it's Firefox or your audio editor or your terminal. You'd go click and then click and then click, and then eventually you'd get to the thing you want, and you'd hit the button and you'd launch.
Okay.
And Unity changed that in that you just stab a button on the keyboard, the Windows key, or you press the big button in the corner and start typing. Now, early implementation of that didn't work particularly well, and there were some features that people didn't like, like, for example, the online search results and other things people didn't like.
Yeah.
But the whole system of search for what you want rather than hunt and peck through a menu, everyone's implemented that now, right?
Yes.
On a Mac, if you want to launch an application, you hold the Mac and space, and a box pops up, and you type the thing and you press enter. On Windows, you press the Windows key, you type, you press enter. Every desktop does this now. And unfortunately, we were blazing a trail in what we thought was the right way to do it. And there was some pushback in the community, and people didn't like that change. But it turns out, actually, we weren't wrong. And the whole search metaphor is what everyone does now. It's what people do on, mobile devices and desktops.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I lost my train of thought. I should have had my morning coffee. It's morning for me, as you can tell. No, it's fine.
Thing of coffee here to keep you going this afternoon.
Thank you. Just get past it to the screen, transport it. No, but what was I going to say? Yes, keyboard centric. Yeah, as well. The thing is, there is somewhat of a drawback if someone is completely new to Linux and not sure what they're looking for. It'd still be nice to have a category or a list. I'm like, oh yeah, I think that's what I need. I enjoyed Unity's keyboard-centric features. I mean, once I knew, I use specific apps now. I use specifically usually Chromium, maybe OBS, Kdenlive. So I just, tap, type, go. But a newbie, a beginner, may not know this. It would be nice to have both a list, a drop-down menu, and a keyboard-centric type of system.
Right. But it has that. You can press the button and then you can just scroll through all the applications.
Right.
It's not perfect, and different desktops do this differently. But it's not one exists and the other isn't there. It's different, sure. It's not the same as the old Windows 98 style, hierarchical menu. It's not the same. It is different, and sometimes. And the other thing I used to hear around about it reminds me of when Unity first came out, and people kept telling me, on Linux, you're making these big changes, and this doesn't happen on other platforms. They don't do this on other platforms, and they absolutely do. And people kept arguing that people can't cope with change. They can't cope when when you move their cheese. They don't cope. But it turns out in corporate environments, there are millions of people around the world who don't own the computer they use 9 to 5. And their IT department has a policy that changes from one version of Windows or one version of Office to another. And there's a big user interface change. They cope. They cope perfectly fine. It might be a little bit abrasive at first. It might be difficult learning where the new buttons are and, oh, I don't know which menu I need for this thing and that thing. But humans can cope with that change. They're resistant when you tell them you're going to do it. But if you just do it, then they do cope. And part of the problem for Unity was it wasn't super stable in the first few iterations. And so there was the combination of we're changing everything and it's not very stable. And those
well, if any system isn't stable, obviously. Why did Ubuntu go from? Why did they choose GNOME as their desktop when they transferred from Unity? Was there a specific?
So in April last year.
Yes.
Right. So we'd been using and developing Unity since 2010 or thereabouts. There were early versions before that. There was a Netbook Remix, you may remember. So we iterated on the design quite a bit over a year or two, and then, as you said, it became the default desktop in 2010, 2011. And then we were the upstream for Unity, and we had a team working on Unity, and that Unity 7, which ships in 1604, the latest LTS release. As we're recording this, another one will come out in a few weeks' time, but the current stable release is 1604 with LTS. Now, we had a significant investment in developers who were creating Unity 7 and then the Unity 8, which was the next generation for mobile devices. And Mark Shuttleworth, placed a bet on Ubuntu Phone being a success and Unity 8 being the next generation and convergence, and it didn't pay off. That we didn't succeed there by any measure. You can say how many devices we sold, how many developers got on board, how many key applications were ported to Ubuntu Phone. We failed, right? And as part of leaning the company up a bit, we stopped developing those things which were projects we're passionate about, but projects which just weren't succeeding. And unfortunately, you could argue that the phone wasn't succeeding, Unity wasn't succeeding, Unity 8, the next generation. Now, that left us with a desktop, but we still needed to slim down the company. And so really, there was no need for us to continue developing a desktop environment when there were other options available. And GNOME seemed to be the one that most distributions were using. Yes, there are others. There is Mate, there is KDE Plasma, there are plenty of others, Cinnamon and all the others. But it seemed that, by any measure, you look through the most popular Linux distributions, and GNOME Shell is the user interface that they use. Everything outside Ubuntu is basically GNOME Shell.
Wow.
So it kind of makes sense because the rest of the community have made that decision.
Yeah.
So we move with them. It's no different really than, we started work on Mir around the same time as Wayland was picking up. We've worked on Upstart before systemd became available. And when other people in the community have decided, actually, we're going to switch and we're going to switch to systemd, we switched from Upstart to systemd because it made no sense for us to carry on. So it makes no sense for us to carry on with Unity if the rest of the world has made that decision that GNOME is the way the Linux desktop should look.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Ubuntu and GNOME had... go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah,
and it's worth noting that we had in the desktop team at Canonical a bunch of people who know GNOME very well. They have a long history because before we shipped Unity on the desktop, we had GNOME, and so some of those people who worked on GNOME 7-8 years ago still work at the company. The desktop team is predominantly a bunch of people who've worked at the company for more than 6, 7, 10 years.
Okay,
and so they know GNOME very well. So if you're going to switch to another desktop, if we were to switch to Plasma, KDE, or something like that, That would make no sense because all the skills in-house are all around GNOME. It would make no sense for us to switch to Cinnamon or anything else, really. Just, when you take a step back, no other desktop makes sense for us to switch to.
So nothing else was considered, period?
Oh, no. They were all considered. Everything was considered.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
When you evaluate the pros and cons of every desktop, we looked at all of them, everything that you can name. We looked at all of the prominent ones that, currently get bug fixes and security updates and are still maintained. We didn't look at some of the weird esoteric desktops that nobody maintains anymore, obviously.
Right.
We think Next Step or Motif would be a good option for us in 2018. And bear in mind, that's the other thing is we've got to look for what we're going to ship in the next LTS. We're always like these interim releases that come out every 6 months. We're building up to what's the LTS going to look like. Now that next LTS is in, as we record this, 2 weeks, 3 weeks time. And so that thing is going to be on people's desktops for years. And so we've got to be able to support that thing. And if we get some weird esoteric desktop that we've got to now support for 5 years, it's just, it's a no-brainer.
Okay, fair enough.
We have relationships with upstream GNOME as well. So we rebuilt those relationships as well. If someone's coming from Unity, we created a GNOME Shell session, an Ubuntu GNOME Shell session that looks a bit like Unity because all things being considered, we did a ton of design work on Unity and we did a ton of user testing on what works and what doesn't work. And it makes no sense for us to throw that all away. So we've reused some of that in the way that we design the session.
So Ubuntu has two out of the three things going for me. I think it looks great. Out of the box, I think it looks fine. It's stable. I haven't noticed a single crash in that beta. Now I don't use it every day, granted, but it's stable. But it doesn't have speed as compared to Unity, which was a little faster. In my machines and my tests, of course, Ubuntu Mate. Say hello to Martin for me. It does not have at least the speed that I've been used to. Now maybe things will get progressively better with each release to make it more efficient. I'm not sure if that's possible with GNOME, but that's probably the number one complaint I see is it's sort of a resource hog. The workflow is not as smooth or friendly as, say, Mate or XFCE, and I understand. I'm not saying that Ubuntu GNOME is horrible, but if I had to pick one for newbies, GNOME may not be my first choice right now.
So there's two ways to, let's take a step back. So GNOME Shell is written in, large part of it written in JavaScript, and there is an engine that runs that JavaScript, and that could do with some optimization. I don't think anyone is under any illusion that GNOME Shell is highly performance tuned out of the box. It needs a bit of work, and I know the upstream developers are doing that. Now, us having a huge audience of users, and we do have a tremendously huge audience of users, moving those people over to GNOME Shell, and a lot of them did when 17.10 came out. Remember, 17.10 had GNOME Shell by default. Tons of people came back to Ubuntu in 17.10. That allows us to give some feedback to the GNOME developers to say, well, in these environments, maybe multi-screen environments, or when you're doing these particular use cases, it's not performing as well as it could be, right? So we can help provide that feedback to the GNOME developers that they might not have had in the past, because GNOME Shell didn't have as many real users, like your mum and pop or whoever uses as Unity did, right? And don't forget that Unity has, because it's had a ton of users over a period of 7 years, we've put a lot of work into it. And so by now, Unity in 18.04 is really stable. I mean, yes, it is pretty performant, but yeah, there's some work to do in GNOME Shell. I don't think...
Fair enough.
That's not true. But extensions. So extensions are a tricky area, because with GNOME Shell, there is an experience that the GNOME Shell developers have designed, and that they believe is the way that is the most efficient way to use your computer, right? And you might not agree with that. And that's why extensions exist, so that you can augment the default GNOME experience with additional features, changes to default behaviors, things that are missing in GNOME Shell, you can add in via extensions. And this gives developers an opportunity to add things into GNOME Shell and build upon GNOME Shell,
yeah,
which is fantastic.
Yes.
However, this does mean that you are, when you install extensions, you are downloading code from random people on the internet,
yes,
and baking that into your desktop.
Yeah.
And if you take a step back, that's a completely crazy idea, right? Adding an extension to your web browser is often a great way to add functionality to the base of a web browser. But the web browser is one application. Adding an extension to Firefox or adding an extension to Chrome isn't going to screw up your LibreOffice capabilities on your local machine. It's not going to mess up your OBS installation, right? But the desktop is the thing that presents all your applications, so it can completely screw your entire experience. If you
risk factors,
install a dodgy.
It makes sense.
So we took the step to make it actually a little bit harder to install extensions. It's not enabled out of the box, but the two ways you do it, you can. There's an extension for your browser, which you can install, and as soon as you do that, when you go to the extensions website in Firefox, for example, and you browse extensions, you can just press a button and it will install it straight away. No downloading zip files, no unpacking, none of that. You just press a button and it installs and runs the extension. The other option is there's a desktop utility, a tweak tool, and you can install extensions through there as well.
Yeah.
So those are like the normal person way.
Right. I have noticed that some of the extensions work and some don't. That's like a hit and miss.
Yeah.
Is there any way to suggest maybe have Ubuntu approved extensions that will work and have a list? Is that even possible?
Well, we do that. So some of the extensions that are in your, like, we in 1710 and upcoming 1804, we ship GNOME Shell plus a couple of extensions.
Okay.
Now, the way that we install those extensions is they're packaged up as Debian packages, like everything else on the desktop is a deb.
Yeah.
And so those go through our testing or QA before they land in the archive. So those are go through that process of testing the extensions before they land. Now, anyone could package up any other extension and put it as a deb and get it in the archive. There's a bit of a barrier there, though, because packaging an extension up as a deb is an extra task, especially when you want to put it in the Ubuntu archive. You could put them in a PPA maybe, but even then, how do users discover that? And adding PPAs is a bit of a mess. And then, do you trust that PPA any more or less than the extension website? So it's tricky, and we've tried to curate some extensions and put those in the Ubuntu archive so that you can install them. But I don't think we want to be in the business. I don't think we want to be in the business of reviewing every single extension in the store in the extensions website. Right.
Maybe I should do a live show. Okay, to all the GNOME users out there or potential GNOME, what are your top 5 or top 10 must-have GNOME extensions? Maybe compile that and send it to you.
So I basically did that in the form of a blog post. When we first announced that we were going to switch from Unity to GNOME Shell by the default, I wrote up a blog post which was, okay, let's try this thing out. And I used stock GNOME Shell, and I found it very difficult to use. I found my like muscle memory for certain keyboard combinations, those have gone away, or they've changed, or they were just never implemented in GNOME Shell. And certain things I'm used to doing in Unity were just completely different in GNOME Shell. So what I wanted to do was turn GNOME Shell into a more Unity-like experience. And I found there was a bunch of extensions I could do to add things and move things around and re-implement the behavior that was in Unity. And I found I got pretty comfortable. And it turns out that's pretty much what the desktop team have done in 1710. They've identified a very small number of tasteful extensions that change the default behavior in GNOME Shell.
Okay.
Yeah, it's but you have to remember what you're doing is baking random JavaScript from the internet into your desktop, and so you can compromise the stability of your desktop by adding this stuff in.
Right.
It's a compromise you make.
Okay. I'm trying to think at the top of my head, what do I need for Ubuntu to make it? Okay, I like the media player drop-down menu. Okay, that's nice. I like the dash to dock. I like the, what's it called, the GNOME menu, where it gives you like a drop-down list, menu list. Legacy icon support. So what, that's 3 extensions. I think there's a few more. I probably don't need 9 or 10 extensions, Alan, to be perfectly honest. But I would probably need to install, we'll say 5, to make it where I can do this every day.
And I think that's
I think that's fair. Yeah.
We asked the internet, you know, which extensions before we implemented it all in 1710. We did ask the internet what extensions, and we got replies, and we got, you know, different replies, because some people hate this and some people hate that, and so obviously fringes you get some random extensions, but in the middle, the bulk of people wanted the same 4 or 5 extensions exactly like you.
Fair enough.
Which is what led to 1710 and 1804. So we think that will appeal to most people.
Okay. Stability, special looks. I think it looks great out of the box. Speed. You think that will improve as time goes on? It feels. It might 4 gig. Yeah.
I mean, you've probably already seen. There's a long-standing bug. Well, I say long-standing. It's been filed a while ago, where sometimes, under certain circumstances, GNOME Shell can consume more memory than you'd expect, right?
Yes.
And this was highlighted in an article on OMG Ubuntu. Joey wrote about it, and that drew attention. That, you know, the internet discovered this bug. I mean, it's existed for a while. It's just not having necessarily the right priority, or the number of developers looking at it, or the right developers looking at it, because, you know, there's a ton of bugs in every desktop, not just at the shell, but all the pieces and underlying pieces that go with it. And now it's being addressed. So I think once once we've got however many million Ubuntu users there are who are using 14.04, or even some still on 12.04 and 16.04, once they upgrade to 18.04, which won't be overnight, it won't. I don't think everyone's going to upgrade from 16.04 to 18.04 on like April the 28th, the Friday. I think it's more likely a transition over the next 3 months after April. Some people will come over, and then when the next point release goes out, 16.04 people will get the pop-up that says, hey, you can upgrade.
Yes. Right.
So over the 6 months between now and October, I expect people will start raising bugs, because there will be more users using it. There will be workflows that we've never seen before, you know, people with strange setups and wacky applications that we didn't even know existed, like could be in corporate environments, where they say, hey, this doesn't work as I'd expect. I've never used GNOME Shell before, but because Ubuntu has switched, I'm now using GNOME Shell. And it breaks in this situation. And so we need to carefully curate those bugs and help upstream fix them. So the short answer to your question is yes, I expect performance to improve, exactly as it did for Unity. Like, you may remember, Unity in 2010, 2011 was not the best experience in the world, you know, performance-wise as well. But then remember,
it got better.
But then remember, that's 8 years ago. Computers 8 years ago looked like this old crusty ThinkPad I have here.
I have 2 of those, actually, yeah.
and so technology moves on, and now the computer I'm using now, like, I would never have dreamed I'd be able to have a computer with this much power 8 years ago. I could probably dream it, but, you know. So thing moves on, and...
Well, you know, I mean, there are probably a certain amount of Windows users who want to revive the old Windows Vista machinery and Windows XP. And Ubuntu GNOME, probably not the best choice right now. But obviously, if you have enough power, enough RAM, it doesn't matter. That's why I tell people, if you're gonna buy, I recommend buying, if you want to test Linux, truly test, to buy a refurbished spare machine. So you want to buy a laptop. As long as it has at least 4 gigs of RAM, dual core, you're probably going to be okay to try any type of Linux, even, you know, with, you know, Ubuntu GNOME. Anything less RAM than that, you're going to have to be a little bit extra picky.
But don't forget that the Ubuntu family is very large and diverse. It's not just GNOME, if you
Yes.
want to, you can have all the benefits of having a large pool of software and lots of support avenues to help you with problems on Ubuntu.
Yeah.
But you don't have to run Ubuntu proper. You could run Lubuntu, for example. If you want a really lightweight desktop, that's still built in the same infrastructure. It's made by the same people. It's lightweight, leaner, or like XFCE, or you and I, our favorite Ubuntu Mate. So there are lots of options. You don't like Ubuntu isn't just this is the only option you get. You have to use it. There are so many other options in the archive.
Right. That's what I try to point him to. If you don't like one flavor of Ubuntu, try another one.
Right.
But I still like, just to be safe, buy a machine at least 4 gigs of RAM. You're probably going to be okay no matter what you want to try. I would say. So what does the future hold for Ubuntu? Obviously, GNOME's going to stay, so you predict it'll be more streamlined, a little bit faster, more speedy, less bugs, more user-friendly. I'm assuming that's where,
the future, like, bear in mind, we're about to put an LTS out. We tend to be a bit conservative when we put an LTS out. We may hold back new versions of things because they're not fully stable yet. We also might hold back implementing lots of brand new features and redesigning things in 1804 in the LTS, because people are going to be running this for years, and so we have to be very careful of what we put in, what we bake in on day one. People will still be using. Like, I sometimes see reports from people who've just now installed 1604. Now, bear in mind that's two years old, but they've just installed 1604, and they're seeing the out-of-the-box experience you would have seen 2 years ago. So you've got to remember that for years from now, people will still have that ISO around, that very first ISO, and they will still be installing it. So we have to be quite careful what we put in the LTS. But what that means is the next release, 1810, sometimes they get the release after an LTS, rather disparagingly, gets called a cowboy release. Because it can be a little bit crazy. The one immediately, like 1610 or 1410 or 1010, they're all a little bit crazy in one way or another, because we added things that we couldn't put in the LTS, and we thought, right, let's get this in the one after the LTS, because proportionally 10 times, depending on how you measure it and which LTS, 10 to 20 times more people run LTS than non-LTS. It's a dramatic difference between how many people run LTS.
It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
It does.
Because a non-LTS is still 9 months for support, right?
Right. But some people have this perception that a new version of Ubuntu comes out, everybody upgrades. And that's far from the truth. Like, there are certainly people within our community and, active open source fans who will upgrade to the next thing every single time. But and I don't know what that's going to hold in 1810. I don't know what the new wacky things. I'd love to hear from what people think we should do in 1810. Like, what are the things that we didn't do in 1804 that you think we should do it? I know one thing that we didn't quite get done in time was the new theme, the new community developed theme for Ubuntu.
Okay.
Won't land in 1804. It'll be available as a PPA, and we'll look at maybe making it installable as a snap. I know Didier Roche from the desktop team is working on that right now. But 1810 will likely have the new community theme. So the thing about speed is you can hold your hands up and say it's slow, right? But we need to know specifics. Like, it's no good telling a developer GNOME Shell is slow, right? That's what are they going to do with that information?
True.
Like, is it slow? Like, it could be that it's only slow when you're using 3 monitors, or it could be it's only slow when you're using the NVIDIA Nouveau driver, or it's only slow under this circumstance or that circumstance. So we need really well curated issues, bug reports, and we need people to do deep dives in the code as well to say,
fair enough.
It's not straightforward to fix. Like, make it faster. There isn't.
You need more specific. Right. It's kind of like jumping on the highway and not knowing where you're going, and your GPS is broken. So which way do you go to fix something?
Right. And I get feedback from people who've been running GNOME Shell on something other than Ubuntu, and they tell me, well, it's fast here. I don't know what you're talking about. So, like, we need to do a deep dive on what are the individual components? Because like just saying it's slow isn't enough. We need to dive into what exactly is slow. Is it a version of a driver we have on Ubuntu that they don't have on Fedora? Is it the extensions that we have by default? Is it the theme? There's so many things that can affect
You're looking for a pattern and say, aha, it's this, this, and this, or it's that. Right, exactly. Right. Exactly. I think you guys will probably get there. But that being said, I will put Ubuntu 18.04 when it's finalized on my list for a beginner to try out. It may not be the top choice, especially for an older, less power machine. But again, if you have at least a dual core 4 gigs, if you want to give it a try, I would say go for it. I think it'll get better. But in my Toshiba, I'll wait till the final version comes out and do all the updates and give people my final thoughts. But it's stable. I'm impressed. It looks great out of the box. Again, I'm not too much into themes or stuff like that. I wish was a little bit more faster. And that's probably going to be the only reason why we'll probably take it out of that test machine, install like MX17 or Peppermint OS or whatever, because I do like speed. Zip in and out of an app or whatever. But it is stable, and as long as a distro is perfectly stable out of the box, how can you not at least recommend the try, right? Only reason to say no is it keeps on crashing, and then don't use it. But Ubuntu's fine, so give it a shot. And hopefully as time progresses, it will get more streamlined, a little bit faster. I mean, look at the KDE desktop. It is super fast. It used to be one of the worst for resources, right? And now look, it's like twice as fast. So whatever they did, it took years. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where it was kind of slow. Like 2-3 years ago it was too slow. Now it's like, wow, this is pretty fast.
Well, the same could be said for Unity as well. Like when Unity first came out, it was, but then, like as I've said before, hardware catches up. But now, if you go and buy a laptop today, it's pretty much impossible to buy a laptop that can't run Unity. So hardware has moved on. Yes, we've optimized the code and it's got a bit faster over time, but also the hardware moves on. I'm not saying that everyone should wait for 2020 and then install 18.04, but when history tells us these things do improve, like the code does get better, the hardware gets better. So I think while you can go and dig out a crusty old laptop from the past and install it and say, hey, it's slow, you can do that for any desktop.
That is true. Like I said, I have a certain amount of people who want to revive that old machine that had Windows XP, Vista 7. That's one of the advantages of some Linux desktops. Absolutely, there's no question. But again, if you have a modern machine that you bought today or last year, or any older machine with at least 4 gigs, I'll say that again, that to me is the key. 4 gigs of RAM, you should be okay. No matter what you got installed, at least from what I have tested. So give Ubuntu a try. 18.04, the final version, April 26,
something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thursday. Always the Thursday.
Okay. All right. But it seems okay now. Again, if you're not sure, run it in a USB bootable stick. It works. A spare machine is best. A virtual machine if you have enough RAM in Windows. Dual booting is okay. Just make sure that you know what you're doing. And I think most Ubuntu installers have an automatic installer to automatically partition. But if you're not sure, don't do it. Just run a USB bootable stick. A spare machine is best, in my opinion. I had to laugh. Brian Lunduke here on YouTube, he was doing a show, his Linux Thursday, and jokingly he says, all dual booters are schmucks. That's the worst way to test Linux. I know what he was saying. He's saying basically it's not the best way, and that's true. That's true. I mean, I didn't take it personal. He was, like, in a way, he's kind of correct. But obviously, best way is a spare machine or a USB bootable stick. Safer ways, I guess, is what he was trying to say. Yeah.
So the first time I ever installed Linux was 1995, 96, something like that. And there is no way I would have nuked my computer and put Linux on it full time. I dual booted. So I had a separate partition with Linux on it. But that was 20 years ago. So things have moved on, and it is more reliable. But
Yeah.
I still think dual booting is a reasonable thing for people to do if they're trying something out. I don't.
Right. Yeah.
But I do agree with you. I mean, I have spare laptops. Like I
Right.
picked up this one on eBay. This crusty old ThinkPad I picked up on eBay.
They're awesome.
I use for testing. Which is great.
ThinkPads love Linux. They just
they do.
love Linux. They just one of the. I have like three. One kind of cracked and broke, but they love Linux. So there's a plug for ThinkPad. They just work. Yeah, I would say a couple $100, maybe $250 should be enough. Don't spend more than that. At least 4 gigs of RAM.
This was like £60, something like that.
Oh, is that all?
I got on eBay. Yeah, it only has 2 gigs of RAM, but you can get RAM cheap enough on these things.
Yeah, you could always install some RAM later, but if you're not sure, if you're not a geek, $200 around there, 4 gigs of RAM, you should be fine. You don't have to take anything out or install new RAM and stuff because maybe they don't know that. Yeah. Any thoughts on the so-called Linux community that sometimes is not friendly? There's been some talk about. I personally have not had a problem. I think Ubuntu's community is fine. What is it? Ask Ubuntu, I think, is one of the websites.
One of our main support sites. Yeah.
Okay, I think they're great.
Super active.
Martin's Mate community. I had asked a question or two on something. They responded immediately, very friendly. I guess it's human nature. There's good and bad in everything.
I think it's difficult. It depends how you measure community, because for Ubuntu, there's those core. If you think of it in concentric circles, there's like those core developers who work on this all day, every day. Some of them are paid by Canonical. Others are people outside Canonical who are just really passionate and work on it. And then you've got people who work closely with those people, but maybe don't develop. Maybe they're doing translations, or maybe they're doing documentation, or maybe they're writing tutorials or something. And then the further out you go, the distance you get from that central core, you often find there are people who are just on the periphery using Ubuntu. They're happy using Ubuntu.
Yes.
But then there are other people who are quite abrasive and don't like us and aren't interested in Ubuntu and aren't interested in anything we do.
Yes.
And unfortunately, those people can be quite vocal. They're not part of, like, if you consider the Ubuntu community as like the inner 3 or 4 circles of people. These people are way out there, like, running Arch or whatever other weird distro they're on, and they just don't like us, and that's fine. But the problem is they've got the loudest voices on the internet, and as I said before, there are a lot of people who use multiple distros, whether it's Fedora or SUSE or KDE Plasma, but they just don't necessarily feel the need to vocalize it. But this is not the frustrating thing is this is not unique to computing. There are clubs. Like BMW owners clubs, there are Mercedes owners clubs, there are like Toyota owners clubs, and they're passionate about the thing that they love, right? And anyone who does that other thing, he's an idiot if he drives that car, because why would you buy that car? And for some reason, people get super passionate about this stuff. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I guess it's human nature to want to rant, to get it off your chest, as it were. This channel over the years, I guess, has become something of a sanctuary for beginners who maybe were not treated with kindness in the past for whatever reason, or maybe asked a technical question. Maybe the response was, "Look it up, dummy," or whatever, Look, you have choices as a beginner. I mean, to me, a beginner would be like a newbie would be like, "Hey, have you tried Linux?" This is their response. That's a newbie. A beginner would be, "Have you tried Linux?" "Yeah, I installed whatever, ABC Linux, but I'm not sure how this works or that works. I played it." That's a beginner. But a newbie would be a complete, not even heard of Linux maybe, or maybe heard of it but has no clue. That's what I mean by a newbie. Sometimes we interchange. Newbie is like what I was back in 2005. I kind of heard of Linux, but I didn't know what it was. I mean, it started back in 2006. Oh, so this is what Linux is, a kernel. It's not really an OS, and so on and so forth. But that's a newbie. So there we go. Well, what could I say? Ubuntu is getting better. My Linux gold standard for newbies. I have to stress that, so I can know thing in the mail for newbies is Ubuntu Mate. Out of the box, everything just works. It's lightweight for an older machine. Even if you just have a gig, I think you can install it with the gig. I think. I think you can. 2 gigs, you should be fine. It's not shocking to the system. And Martin did a great job with the Ubuntu, the Mate tweak, the 7-panel layout changes to make it your. I think it's brilliant.
It is.
The software.
You can feel at home on Ubuntu Mate wherever you've come from.
Pick one.
Like, those layouts are great. You can make it look like OS 10. You can make it look like Windows. You can make it look like Unity if you want to. It's
See,
great.
there's an extension recommendation for Ubuntu. Popey, baby. I don't know. Too much code, right? But if you are a complete newbie, I'm not saying you can't install Ubuntu, with GNOME. But it may take a little bit more navigating to get comfortable with it. But I guess the point is, if you are new, start somewhere. Install something, go from there. You may or may not like it. Probably USB bootable stick is probably the best way to go right now. If I had to pick one, you don't have to make bootable disk and all that nonsense. Yeah.
Maybe go to one of these distro review websites and just pick whatever the latest thing is. Try that out.
Right. Right.
I got my first Linux distro in a book. I bought a book from a bookshop, and there was a CD in the back of the book. Nowadays, you can just download it or go and buy a magazine that has it on. So, there's a tremendous amount of choice.
Well, think about it. I posted something on my personal Facebook page. 1956, IBM had this 5 megabyte hard drive. It looked like a bus. It was huge. And now, of course, you can fit the whole world on this stick here, but you can make a USB bootable stick. It's not that hard. Boot into the BIOS, boot from the stick. You're not installing, you're just trying it. You're trying a system that I think that's almost a miracle when you think about it, how far technology has progressed. But I think you can do that with almost any Linux-based system. I know some of them probably will not work off a stick. But I think all the Ubuntus, will work off a stick, Alan, if I remember. Okay.
They will. Yeah.
All right. That's my final thoughts on all this. Give it a shot. Ubuntu's getting better. Go from there. And if you have questions, don't forget to check out ubuntupodcast.org every week.
Yeah, we record a little podcast we record every 2 weeks, and we put it out every week. So every Thursday a new episode goes out.
I like the format of yours. You start off with that silly music back from the 40s.
1927 that comes.
Is that what it is? Wow. Wow. It's still kind of cool though. It catches my attention.
Yeah, you either love it or you hate it. And
no, I think it's fine. And about 30 minutes each show sounds about right. Yeah, for the topics, user friendly show. So check out ubuntupodcast.org. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel was designed for beginners, for newbies, total technology for beginners and beyond. I mean, I've gotten a little more advanced over the years, but if you have a question, if you've been lost before, stop by and say hello. Alan, it's been a joy. We haven't talked face to face in, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years. It's been a long, So Alan Pope from Ubuntu, from the Ubuntu Kingdom. We'll have to do this again sometime. Look, I have to toss some news and nonsense, everything, every so often, But we'll do this again soon. My next conversation will be with Martin. He says he'll be available after April. I'm going to hold you to that, Wimpy. I think you call him Wimpy, right? Is that his nickname?
That's right.
Wimpy. Okay, all right. Wimpy. So I'm going to talk about the Linux Gold Standard. Make him happy. I'll have the champagne bottle ready and all that, All right. On behalf of Alan Pope and myself, we are signing off. We'll catch you next time. Take care.